For the second video here, I'm looking at evaluation. And evaluation claims that something is part of a group, and you notice I highlighted group here because that's the most important thing for you to take away. It's part of that group because it shares the group's characteristics or traits. And again, there are other kinds of evaluations, but this is the one that makes the most sense for college writing, particularly what we're doing this week. So you'll be doing this in all kinds of courses. In chemistry, maybe you're having to argue that elements in a particular group of the periodic chart belong together. Right, here's my example. The element Na, sodium, is a member of the group alkalis. Why is it? Because it shares the traits of alkalis. Homer's Odyssey is an example of epic poetry. Why? Because it shares conventions of epic poetry. I can go through and label all these conventions and show how the Odyssey meets them. Is Psalm 23 in a religion course? Is Psalm 23 an example of the group called wisdom literature? Yes, it is, because it shares the characteristics of wisdom literature. Is the duck-billed platypus a marsupial? It is, and it's not, right? You're not always going to hit all of the characteristics in a group. Some characteristics you may hit, some you may not. Maybe you don't hit any of them. Maybe that's your argument, that it's not part of this group because it doesn't fit all of the characteristics. All right, so those are some examples. Your task is to determine what category or film your film or monster, art monster belongs to. So what are the characteristics of that particular category? Explain them, and explain how your monster does or does not fit those characteristics. So I'm using as my example here Lon Chaney's werewolf in the 1941 film The Wolfman. One of the studios who produced horror movies, monster movies, was Universal Studios, and they had a particular signature werewolf. In other words, they had several werewolf films, and the werewolf always had specific traits. That was their signature werewolf. My claim is that Lon Chaney's portrayal of a werewolf in the 1941 film The Wolfman, again here in red, corresponds to Universal Studios' signature werewolf. So then in the essay I'd have to explain what all these characteristics of a Universal Studio werewolf is, and explain how Lon Chaney's werewolf does or does not meet all of those characteristics. Does that make sense? And you might do that in 3 or 4 body paragraphs. In a really long research paper, those might be 3 or 4 bigger sections, right? We're doing a rather short paragraph, so this can be done all in each characteristic in one paragraph. That's an evaluation. All right, don't just go off the term evaluation and say, oh, I know what that is. We're looking at something very specific. It's a very specific task that you will do again and again in college. So a lot of your claims I've rejected because you're not doing what it is that you're being asked to do here. All right, so again, this is a very specific writing task, and you really need to nail that before I'll sign off on it. Finally, comparison. Throughout school, you were probably told to compare something, which meant to look for similarities between 2 or more topics, or contrast 2 or 3 topics, right, and look for their differences. A lot of times in college we'll just tell you to compare, and what we really mean is for you to do both. So if you see compare, chances are pretty high you're supposed to look for similarities and differences, all right? So I'm going to compare the werewolves from 2 different movie studios in my sample. So, and I'm going to compare it on the same characteristics. So I'm going to look at Universal Studios of the 1930s and 40s, and American International, AIP, American International Pictures Studio from the 1950s. So I'm going to select one movie werewolf from each of those studios to compare. I can, as I say up here, I can list all my comparative elements in the claim, or sometimes the second sentence, but I don't have to. I don't have to tell you in my claim what all my topics of comparison are going to be. I can, but sometimes that leads to really long, clunky claims, but that's your choice. So my claim, finally here in red, the signature werewolf of Universal Studios, which is exemplified by Lon Chaney's character in the 1941 The Wolfman. Oops, I lost my italics there. The movie title should be in italics. So the signature werewolf in the Wolf of Universal Studios is exemplified by the Wolfman, And it is different in major ways from the werewolf in AIP studio films, as is seen in the Michael Landon monster in I Was a Teenage Werewolf. So I've got two monsters, one from the Wolfman, one from Teenage Werewolf. And I'm going to compare those two monsters. And I could compare them on lots of different traits, but maybe I just pick these three traits: looks, level of violence that they use, and their love interest. All right. So again, since this is a short essay, I might have one paragraph on looks where I talk about both the Wolfman and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. I talk about the looks of both werewolves in that paragraph. Level of violence in both the Wolfman and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. The love interest of the werewolf in both the Wolfman and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. That's how a comparison is organized. All right. So I hope you find this useful. And I have to assume that you're watching the videos I've already given you before, but from some of the claims it didn't really feel like it. So if for some reason you just skipped all that and said, oh, I can just toss out a claim, I know what I'm doing. If you did skip those lectures, you need to go back and review those and give me a good claim so that you can get moving on this essay, because then we have to move on to our science paper where you're going to do a different kind of a claim, all right, a fourth kind of claim. So let's make sure you're super comfortable with these before we move forward.